I'm into practice mode. Webinar is now broadcasting to all attendees. But can you try again? Okay, because it was in practice mode. So I got the host fixed and then got it out. Okay, thanks. Oh, bye.
I'm on.
Yay.
That looks better.
Yeah. Oh, that's quite a view too.
Yeah, it does look better.
Yeah.
Had me scared there for a minute.
Oh dear God, you were scared. There was no host. I found where to figure out, anyway. And then we put it in practice mode, but I couldn't allow anybody in practice mode.
Oh, okay.
I was supposed to practice by myself. I don't know. Okay,
Phew.
take a deep breath.
Yep.
I am not Paula.
Oh,
I'm gonna change that right now. Okay. But I got Paula's picture up there. That's not
yeah,
good.
that's nice. We like that, Paul.
Is there a way, I think she is logged in here on our computer in Zoom. Is there a way I can log her out and me in without?
The public may access it following the instructions on this meeting's agenda on the town calendar. If, despite our best efforts, we're not able to provide real-time access, the public can request a recording of this meeting by contacting the town clerk. Tonight, we're using a webinar format to accommodate the large number who are participating. The Finance Committee, the town administrator, and the town moderator are what we're calling the panelists, and everyone else in attendance are the participants. So I'm just going to review the format for this evening. We have an hour and a half set aside, and the Finance Committee is going to present an overview of the budget and town finances for approximately half an hour. Then we'll have an hour for questions, comments from the audience, and we are asking that the audience or participants, if you have a question or a comment, you use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, and you can submit questions in writing, and they will be, Paul Lyons, who's our town moderator, is actually also serving as our moderator for this evening's meeting. So Paul is going to be monitoring all of the questions and then feeding those questions to the Finance Committee. And what we discussed with Paul prior to this evening is that if the same question gets repeated multiple times, he's only going to ask it once. So any questions from any members of the Finance Committee about that? Okay.
Well, and just that if people do want to ask those questions, they should go to the Q&A button on the bottom of their screen, right?
Right.
That's where to do it.
That's the way to do it. Okay, so I'm going to start out just by giving some observations and kind of an overview of where we are with this budget. I don't need to tell anybody that this has been a highly unusual year, given the pandemic and kind of the shutdown. And the pandemic, first of all, the pandemic hit really after the Finance Committee had completed most of its budget research. And the way that the budget is developed is that we have town departments, department heads, and the schools submit a budget to the Finance Committee, and then we engage with each of those different department heads about their budget. We did discuss whether or not the pandemic necessitated a change in our approach and in the change how we looked at the budget. And I think the majority of the Finance Committee members felt that we didn't have a financial disaster for the town of Shutesbury, for town finances, because we went into this pandemic in a really strong financial position and having been, had healthy cash reserves. We also recognize that if the economy does not rebound, or if there are major layoffs at the university or other big employers, that it could have a serious impact both on town residents and on town finances. Clearly, everybody in the community has been impacted by the pandemic in a whole variety of ways, but probably of most concern is the unemployment, which in Shutesbury is around 9%, I believe statewide. The statewide unemployment figures were about 15%. Fortunately, for most people who were impacted by losing their jobs or being laid off, that there was some federal government assistance, and both in terms of unemployment and small business. The town offices have continued to function, and the schools, the Shutesbury Elementary School and the regional schools have had to adapt to a remote learning. So in terms of the FinCom priorities, and I wouldn't say it's unanimous, but that the majority felt that going into this budget that our approach would be to maintain services while at the same time recognizing the impact of the pandemic on a number of families. And so using, again, our healthy cash reserves to maintain services, but also to provide some tax relief for town residents during this fiscal year. Now we're going to go over, so you should have up on your screen the budget report. I hope folks have had a chance to take a look at this, but if you haven't, Eric is going to step through the budget report that the Finance Committee prepared.
Okay, thanks, Rita. Again, if you have questions during this report, you don't have to wait till the end. If you have a question you want answered, feel free to type it in at any point, and we'll try to get to it. Again, with Paul's discretion and so forth. I guess this first page, you're going to read this first little part of the budget here is sort of it in a nutshell. The budget that we're presenting for this year is balanced. It's 6.601165. That is an increase of less than 1%. I believe it's an increase of less than half of it. It's an increase of 0.18%. So it's really, for all intents and purposes, a level funded budget. In terms of revenue sources, most of the revenue sources in this town are residential taxes. We're in a position where we probably rely on that more than other towns. Many other towns do, because we have so much land that's owned by the state. We have so much land that's in Chapter 61, which is a lower taxed vehicle. And we also have a fair amount of land that is, well, we have land that's, we have land and so forth that are tax exempt. And we also have a land, I guess those are really the biggest categories. I mean, as you can see, there's very little commercial, industrial, or personal property tax. So we really pay everything. We're saying in Amherst, let's say 90% of their budget is maybe paid by personal taxes. Ours is more like 95.8, 96%. So we live in a town that has restrictive zoning. We have a lot of property that is, as I mentioned, that is not really taxed fully. And the end result is, because we have that situation, we have nice woods and nice walks and nice everything, but we pay for it. And that's, I think, the bottom line. Local receipts are things like excise tax on cars, court fees, and so forth. Pilot money is payment of, is called pilot money, so-called, is payment in lieu of taxes. That's the land from the DCR, the town of Amherst, and so forth. I would point out that the new solar field, Wheelock Solar Field, is also a pilot. That's just the way, don't ask me why, that's the way state accounting works. Estimated state aid, which we're assuming is going to drop like 30% this year. That's the crux of one of the biggest problems we have. And that really is a guess. The fiscal year 2020, that is, say, the year we're in right now, that state aid has not dropped at all. The state has said that we're going to be held harmless, so-called, for this year. Next year, we're assuming a 30% tax cut. I mean, I'm sorry, so a 30% estimated state aid cut. To make that up, we're putting a lot of money from free cash, which we, as Rita has suggested, we have a fair amount of. The septic betterment loan is obviously that goes in and out, and it's whatever. It's one of those little anomalies of the budget process. Anyway, the total revenues equal the total expenses. I guess if we can go to page, well, we can go to page, this is just if you look at the graph, that's just a graph of what I just said. So we can look at that for 1 second. But if we can go to the second page, I can go over the expenses a little bit. Again, that graph that you're looking at now is really that's really what we're going to be talking about. That's just a graphic representation of it. And I'll try to do this. We really don't have a lot of time to do this, so I'll just hit this, and obviously there'll be some questions, but I'll try to get the high points. As I said, the total budget increase for this year is $11,781. That's out of a $6.6 million budget. So once again, that's effectively, might call it a rounding error. It's effectively a level funded budget. The elementary school has a $21,362 budget increase. That is also effectively, I don't have that right in front of me. That's also effectively a level funded budget, I believe.
Eric?
It's like less than 1%.
Eric?
Yes.
While you're looking for that, I just wanted to ask if the other panelists can mute themselves while either Eric or Rita are talking. There is some interference from other participants. Thank you.
No problem. The regional school, which is of course always an interesting subject, the regional school in number 1C there has a level funded budget from fiscal year 20, but due to the change in the assessment method where we are moving toward the statutory method, it's created a $99,771 decrease for the town of Shutesbury, which is of course welcome. The town employees' salary increases, excluding the schools, represent $17,294. I believe that's like 0.18% or something like that. I don't have that right in front of me, but that sounds right to me, as I recall. Anyway, it's very small, percentage-wise. If you go into number 2 there, boy, some of that, I mean, I could spend the entire night trying to explain some of the stuff. I'm not sure what to hit here. I guess I'm not sure. Well, I guess I've said some of it before, like 2C, that we're anticipating a 30% decrease in state aid. And in 2D, as Rita has said, we've decided to spend some free cash and put that against the budget. And that the bottom line of all this is it should represent about a $350 tax decrease on every home in town, on the average home in town, I should say, that being $242,000 and $242,448. That's the average home value. Obviously, if you have a home value that's higher, you get more of a rebate, or whatever you want to call it, a tax cut. These are just, I will just state them, the obvious, the free cash reserves before we go into this whole budget process. In number 4, those are the capital items that we suggesting are to be funded by capital stabilization. We can get into those in more detail if anyone wants to. There are elementary school floors, elementary school conference room doors, police radar gun and breathalyzer, and fire department door openers, totaling $34,400. In 4B, addition to reserves from project and revolving funds accounts. Again, very complicated. I will give you the overview of it. Fund 30 is one of the funds in the expense part of the budget. Generally speaking, Fund 30 is where, how should I say, it's where funds go that are, let's just say the town votes to spend $100,000 to do a project. It costs $92,000 to do it, but maybe there's a little more to do, or we aren't quite sure, whatever. The $8,000 remaining goes into Fund 30. And frankly, it tends to sit there unless you take it out of there. Well, we've taken $95,000 and $95,000 out of that for this year. The SREC account closure, that was an account that was sort of being used to pile up money for from SRECs, which are the payments we get for our solar operations here in town. That piled up to $54,000, and we decided that instead of using that for future energy projects, which we may do anyway with some other way, but we weren't necessarily going to hold it for that because there's nothing in the hopper right now. 5A, B, and C explain what the cash reserves will be after stabilization. I'm sorry, after the town meeting, if all the warrants pass as listed. Number 6, those are just a few of the projects that we anticipate will be coming in the near future. In particular, A, B, and C are things that probably will be happening in the near future. Culvert and Locks Pond Road and the elementary school roof in particular are projects that really, I mean, they have to be done. It's one way or the other. With the elementary school roof, we've applied for state grants, I believe, 3 years in a row and have been denied. The state keeps moving the goalposts on what the requirements are, and we keep getting shut out, basically. OPEB number 7 is other post-employment benefits. The town has a trust fund. The state basically is requiring that the town set aside future employment, post-employment benefits, so that it has enough money eventually to pay for all that. We've had a policy where we do that steadily every year, and we've put $50,000 from the budget into that. That's an annual, that's been going on for a long time. Thoughts on the future, you can read them as well as I can. I mean, the big one, I guess, would be in number E. E is like, we're just not, as everyone is reading in headlines, we really don't know what the schools are going to be costing us to run in the next year or so. I mean, there certainly are increases possible. I mean, there's all kinds of PPE and transportation needs, and God knows what happens. I mean, the schools have not figured out what they're going to do yet, frankly. So some of that money will come in from the CARES Act, so-called. That's money that we have to apply for and we get reimbursed for. I can't think of anything else unless anybody, well, I'm sure there'll be some questions. So that's my little overview.
We do have a question that's probably appropriate for right now. And could we go back up to bullet number 4 on the chart? And the question was, what is funded from that total of 34.4 thousand that's exceeded by the details itemized in 1 through 4?
Well, that's a good question. I believe that's just a typo, or is that not right? Becky, do you have a sense of that?
I don't
I think
know.
there were some carryovers, weren't there, from particularly on the school floors from the prior year budget that we were essentially applying to that expense for this year? In other words, there was some funds from a prior fiscal year that,
I believe that is arithmetic error. And it should have said funded from free cash. All these articles are being funded from free cash. So I apologize for not catching this, but the total, whoever brought it up is correct. There's the $2,700 is not included in that total. Is that correct? It's the 2,700 and it
Yes.
should be included in that.
yeah,
total.
that's right.
So the 34,400 is wrong, basically.
37,1.
37,1. Okay, so that's a very, thank you for catching that. Whoever did catch that, that's what it is.
That
is
will be
correct.
corrected as well as the free cash.
So there are a few other general questions at this point that maybe we could address. I think, Eric, you mentioned the 30% cut in state aid, and someone is asking, what is the basis for that? Is that just a guess?
Becky, you want to answer that one? I mean, you've been in contact with the state more than we have.
Back in April, there was an economic summit that the state put on, and at that point in time, not having any accurate historical models, they did modeling on the potential loss of funds to the state budget, and they projected at that point a 15% reduction to the state budget. About 3 weeks later, a new estimate by the Taxpayers Association came back with a revised estimate of minus 20%. And shortly after that, the House decided that they were not going to attempt to make a projection on the amount of cuts until probably September. So the last state estimate that was heard was 20%, and then the unknowns got larger, and to err on the conservative side, the 30% was reached as a comfortable, conservative enough figure.
And I just want to add that if, in fact, our state aid is not cut by 30%, then when the tax rate is calculated, that that actually could result in a lower tax rate. Is that correct?
Yes, and the other option would be for the town, if they so determined, to have a special town meeting in the fall and make a change to the amount of free cash applied to this year's budget before the recap was done, before the tax rate is set.
So that's up to the finance committee to make a recommendation, or who's going to make that?
Board, you know, it would take a special town meeting. So depending on the amount, I mean, if it comes in at 26%, you probably won't make a change. If it came in at 10%, you very might feel that a change was in order. And depending on whether the current economic conditions, the information available at that time would guide that decision making.
There are a number of very specific questions that I think we'll get to as we maybe delve deeper into the line items on the budget, which I assume we're going to be doing. But for now, a couple more general questions to kind of set the stage here. One is, are there recommended guidelines for the amount of free cash a town should maintain? If so, are we maintaining the reserves in excess of that guideline? And if so, why?
Well, I can answer that. There are There are no strict recommendations from the Department of Revenue. The Shutesbury, what do I want to call it, the Finance Committee guidebook basically says 10% at least, minimum 10%. We're obviously higher than that. In terms of why, I guess why would be, as I've mentioned there, well, we're obviously using a lot of it to do this work right here. We used a lot of free cash and stabilization money over the years to help get the broadband project going, which, by the way, is going to save people in town, not necessarily every one of them being I mean, it's not exactly a one-to-one ratio of taxpayer to broadband subscriber, but the people who are broadband subscribers are likely to save, you know, $430 a year in fees for broadband. So, but the town, in a sense, helped that happen. Not that we did it entirely by any means, but the town reserves did get used for that. In fact, the broadband, if broadband operation sort of still owes the town, if you want to call it that, that's, anyway, to pay that back. So I think in generally, there are also a lot of things coming up, like we mentioned, the school roof, the culverts, things like that. I mean, I think the 10%, let's just say the 10% minimum doesn't refer to any specific town situation. If you're in a situation like we are, where there are a lot of expenses coming up, it would be prudent, in our opinion, and I think that the ability for us to use free cash now is proving that there's some advantage to having that free cash.
Another general question is, how is the total levy calculated?
Oh boy.
The total levy or is the tax rate?
Well, it says a total levy. I mean, if that person wants to clarify their question, I'd certainly entertain that.
Yeah. I'm not sure.
The total levy.
Bob, you have to unmute yourself.
It's up here in the upper right-hand corner.
As far as I understand that particular term, it means the amount of money that the town must raise through property taxes to meet their obligations after other revenue sources have been deducted from the budget that's approved. So that levy number is the amount of money that will then have to be distributed by tax assessments, and will actually be a factor of the tax rate. The amount of money that has to be raised at the total evaluation or assessed value of all the real estate that will be taxed will determine those categories. But the levy is actually the gross amount of money the town needs to raise through property taxes. Am I right, Becky?
Yes.
Yeah, I think
Would you like me to display the revenue budget to show that?
There was a request for that.
Okay, let me see if I can pull that off.
You'll notice how I skipped over this part, just because it's really hard to explain a lot of this stuff. It really is just crazy.
Can you see it?
Yeah, we can see it.
So the total levy is right down here.
Right.
It's line 23. So somebody else can take that away.
So you start with the levy from the prior year, and this process has been ongoing for since Prop 2.5 was passed. So if you look over on the left-hand corner, the town meeting approved FY17. The levy that year was $4,712,235,000. You take that amount from the prior year, you calculate 2.5%, and you add that, and then you also add the new growth that is determined each year. And that gives you your property tax levy limit. And from that, you review the valuation of your town. You look at your levy ceiling, and I've added this in recent years. We brought in more detail. You'll see a calculation down below that is called the excess levy capacity number. And that has become important to us in recent years because we've, at $24.04 per thousand tax rate, we are just below the $25 per thousand tax rate. So it's become important for the town to be very careful about not going over that $24 tax rate limit. If you get to the levy ceiling, the property tax levy limit, you add in your debt exclusions, you reach your maximum allowable limit, you subtract out your excess levy capacity, and that's where this year is a bit extraordinary. This year, our excess levy limit is over $538,000. But the result of that excess levy capacity is to bring down our tax levy capacity to just over $5 million. And then you subtract out the overlay and come up with a total levy. Is that clear to everyone?
Sure.
There'll be a test on that in the morning.
We won't know.
Clear to me, but
So let's see, there's another revenue-related question. And then there are a couple like general philosophical questions about high taxes in Shutesbury that I'd like to get to as well. But the other revenue question, since we're looking at revenue, is in regards to the, let me find it again, through the solar, the revenue from the solar project, the pilots from the solar. And I'll read this. It says line 3 of the revenue spreadsheet indicates that that money is, that pilot is included in the $119,661 amount. Then the same amount is subtracted back out on line 4, well, it says 4.5. Could that be 45 perhaps? For a net income of 0. Line 45 is blank. Where is the solar pilot payment accounted for in the revenue spreadsheet that was distributed to the public?
Okay, so currently the amount is not there, as you can see, because we are waiting to have, if you include that new growth amount on top of our 2.5%, the levy limit goes to $26 per thousand. And it's not allowed to do that. So at this point in time, until the values of the town increase, that amount is not directly added to our levy.
I think, Becky, if I understood the question right, it was, is that income accounted for in the spreadsheet?
Half of it is accounted for in the 72,000 from last year's new growth. This year's new growth, while it's still estimated, depending on the valuation, it may or may not come in this year. And the problem with the way that DOR is accounting for income from solars through new growth, it becomes, it becomes very complicated. Last year, you see where the money was included last year. It was about $35,000 in the 72,000. This year, if it was a normal year and we didn't go over $25 per thousand, that 119 would increase the levy limit. But as we can't increase it this year, it won't increase it until there is enough capacity within the valuation to absorb it without going over $25 per thousand. And I apologize for why this is a complicated matter. DOR is working in trying to solve what to do when you're over $25 per thousand.
May I ask a question here? If we were to reduce the increase of the levy above that on line 2, the 2.5% increase, if we were to decrease that amount and make it commensurate with the total commensurate with the inclusion of the new growth, the 119 in line 4B or whatever it's called, wouldn't that be better accounting, representing all the revenue? We just can't exceed $25 per thousand, so therefore, why not reduce the increase in our reduce that 2.5 and make it up there?
Okay, so because all the DOR guidance is that the 2.5 needs to be there in your calculation. Where we do the accounting piece is through the excess levy capacity.
Okay. Does everybody understand this?
No, it's clear that it's not fully understood, and there.
DOR either. This is very
Okay.
few towns have hit 25 per thousand and had banner year new growth at the same time. So I've emailed everything to Joe Markarian, and he finally just a couple days ago said he will look into it because he's never seen anything like it. So the situation is an oddity, but the thing that we are clear on is what our tax levy is, and that is what it is. And we are funding, we're funding a budget way under our tax levy because of the excess capacity. So when and if we ever get back in a position where there is, we don't need that much levy capacity, this will all work itself out.
Okay, it's clear that that's a bit confusing to people. And, Becky, if you do get clarification from DOR at some point, maybe you could put that information out, because there are a number of questions still about it. Great. Oh, okay. I would like to get back to several of the more general philosophical questions. I've gotten, I think, 3 of these at this point, including one via email, about the strain on households in town, with the high tax rate and high tax bills. And well, maybe I should just read a couple of these questions here. So one of them was, why was the proposed pre-COVID budget we will be voting on at town meeting not adjusted to reflect the financial hardships that the pandemic has wrought and will continue to impact on our population, especially the most vulnerable of us? This is, in not quite the same words as saying the gist of a couple other comments that I've received. So could someone address that generally?
Yeah, I can. I think in the opening, I started to talk about it, and it would be great to hear from some of the other finance committee members too. It was it's always trying to reach that balance between maintaining services that the town has come to expect. And if you look at the town budget and the breakout of our expenses, the bulk of funds go for the schools, and then we have the highway department, we have protection of persons and property, and then, some other smaller categories. How we thought to address the issue of the impact of COVID on households was to use some of our cash reserves to reduce the tax rate. And that doesn't affect all families equally, because if you have a home that is only valued at $150,000, $1.40 reduction per thousand isn't going to be as great, obviously, if you have a much more expensive house. And the real expensive house, and there is a range in Shutesbury. So that was our most immediate way of dealing with it this year, because we felt that there's an impact on families and on individuals in town if we reduce services. So it was trying to reach a balance.
So, Bob, did you want to? Oh, yeah.
Yes, I would like to speak to that if I may, given a few moments. I represented to the Finance Committee, and we have a minority, Jim Hemming and myself, that we should reduce our budget and we should adjust a certain parts of our spending. Matter of fact, the committee at large did discuss taking some items that are written into the budget and putting them in the category of free cash transfers and let the town meeting decide. That's not how it worked out. There are certain things, for example, the Finance Committee's fund, which could come out of free cash, which is estimated to be $90,000 this year to increase. And there's others, such as the OPEB, the Library Building Fund. There's a line in the budget, I think it's line number 178, that creates a kind of account that is equal to the amount we spent on the fire truck and the dump truck last year, and that's not coming out of the budget. It's going to be funded into reserves as a method to keep, I think, I can't recall what the term is, but our borrowing
Debt capacity.
Debt capacity. I see if I added up all the items that I've singled out, I can come up with $431,000 of reductions in this budget that would not affect services at all. That would just allow the town to decide whether to fund some of these items with free cash at town meeting. And then if we just simply level funded our departments, we could save an additional $50,000. Level funded, presumably we could have no disruption in services. If we also did not spend capital projects this year, we could have considerable savings. Ultimately, the budget, the way I see it, it says, Eric said it's virtually level. But if you look at $99,000 of reduced assessment at the regional school, that's $1.50 on our, that's a lot of money. That's $100,000. That's a serious actually increase that's built into our budget if you account for that. And there are other things that we've saved some money on, for example, the dump truck and the fire truck. That's another $112,800. That's a lot of money. And that, if that's not really being fairly represented as level funding, we're leaving that money in the budget. So I think that we should, number one, we should be very concerned about the impact on the lower sort of section of our earners in this town and how this budget affects them. And we should be very, very conservative in our planning, because we all agree that we can't really predict what's down the road here. And as far as the idea that if you have a smaller, less valuable house that you'll save less, well, I don't go for that argument at all, because frankly, if you have a smaller, less valuable house, your income is probably considerably less than those who have more expensive and more highly assessed properties. And then therefore, you're proportionally benefit much, much greater by a small reduction in your taxes than somebody who's better off than you. And unfortunately, we all know that property taxes are a very regressive form of taxation. So we have to be aware of that, those sort of issues when we approach the budget. So yeah, I think we should be concerned about that issue.
AJ, were you going to add something there?
Yeah, just a couple of small points. I mean, just one on the last point Bob made there. I think, he and I, we've discussed this in prior meetings. I have a different kind of view of that issue. I think he's right to refer to the property tax as kind of our main vehicle for generating revenue for the town as a regressive tax. And by definition, any tax cut on a regressive tax is going to benefit more affluent or wealthy families, residents more than, I mean, that is the essential definition of a regressive tax. When you cut it, those who benefit the most are those who have the most. But that's kind of a philosophical difference in terms of how we think about that issue. So just wanted to throw that out there. I think the other point I wanted to make is, you know, as everyone can see, the largest segment of our budget applies to our elementary school budget and our contribution to the regional school budget. And all I would say there is that I think it's fair to say that the schools are going to play a critical role in our town and in every town and city in the country in helping our economy rebound during this pandemic. And, you know, I think I personally feel quite strongly that there was not it was not sensible to do any significant cutting from either of those. Obviously, the regional school budget is something we pay into, but I did not think it made any sense for us to do any significant cutting of the elementary school budget for that reason, and also because there are a number of unanticipated expenses that they in all likelihood are going to have to face when they transition to whatever form school takes in the fall. And I did not think it made sense for us to put them in a bad position to make those adjustments by making any kind of dramatic cut to their budget. So, a couple thoughts.
Oh, thank you, AJ and Bob. Those were helpful comments. A couple of things I'd like to say. There are a lot of questions about school-related issues, and maybe we possibly can move into those in a moment. But first, I want to say, ask one other question, and before that, just mention that you know, we're getting a fair number of questions. Some people are submitting multiple questions and some long questions, which is fine. I just want to try to get to as many different people as possible with their questions. So if I don't, you know, present all of, you know, one person's questions, it's because I'm trying to give equal opportunity to others. Speaking of which is a question about our tax rate and our tax bills, I gather, compared to surrounding towns. Someone like to tackle that one? How do they compare?
I'll tackle that. I mean, we have a higher tax rate than most towns around us. I think probably in all towns are right around us. Again, I would attribute the tax rate as much as anything else to the way we raise taxes. That is to say, in Shutesbury, we raise taxes predominantly and in an excessive way from real estate taxes. So whatever happens in the town budget, and it's happened every year, people vote for it every year, comes from us as individuals. In terms of tax bills, my personal feeling is the most prevalent way to look at, the best way to look at it is to compare our tax bills to other towns in the region, since that is to say the regional schools, since those towns really are the ones that we're sort of, you know, in the playground with, if you will. And in terms of that, we are relatively by far the lowest of all those four towns. Shutesbury's bill right now, for example, is 5,983 is the average tax bill. Leverett is 6,483, almost $500 higher. Pelham is 6,842, again, another $500 higher than that. And Amherst is 7,990, another, whatever that, couple thousand higher than that. So what it really boils down to, if you could take your house and plop it down in Leverett, let's just say, you'd pay more money. So in terms of how do you really compare tax rates, I'm not saying they don't mean anything. Obviously they do, but it's really what do you pay for taxes? That's really the question. Single family taxes and tax bills, and I believe we're we're 125 in a state of 351. We're in the top third. We're at the bottom of the top third. Let's just put it that way. So we're not out of range that much compared to other towns, I guess is what I would say. Our tax rate is higher, our tax bills are not higher, they're lower.
I think the only thing I would add to that is when there is a revaluation done, which in FY fiscal year 23, there'll be a full revaluation done. The tax rate will probably drop because as many people know, and certainly as our assessors know, and our other folks in town government know, that properties have been selling in Shutesbury for well above their assessed value. So I think, we can credit or blame broadband, but other just pressures and people wanna live here. We have good schools. We have great environment. And I know people don't want to hear that, but property values probably will go up, and the result will be that the tax rate will probably go down. The tax bills probably won't change. They'll change for some people, but they won't change for everybody. I think I was told about when the reval is done, about a third of the households will pay less, about a third will stay the same, and about a third will pay more. And it's a fairly complex formula to reassess properties, but it's something that's required by the state. It's not, we don't get to choose whether or not properties get revalued. We are required to do that.
Nor do we get to choose how they're valued. That is to say that the assessors are under very, very strict rules from the Department of Revenue about how to set valuations for property. I would just point out too that there are other projects in town, in particular, potential cell phone tower, potential solar installations that could also be part of that tax reduction process or revenue increasing process, or however you want to look at it. That's another possibility in the future.
Okay. One person asked when they can get line by line budget information. And my understanding is that that is available. I know it's available
Yeah.
at shutesbury.org on the select board page right now.
Yes, yeah, the budget is up there.
Budget pages and the revenue pages as well, both sides, expenses and revenues. Okay, so one other general question, and then I'd like to, maybe jump into some specific line item related questions. And let's see, someone asked, what if someone cannot pay their taxes? Both from the homeowner's perspective and the town's. If someone can't pay the taxes, what happens? And does that mean that our revenue also goes down?
I'm not an expert. I can tell you a little bit of what I understand, and then maybe Becky, you can add. I mean, if somebody doesn't pay their taxes, I believe that our tax collector tries to work with community people from the community, if they can't pay, to kind of come up with a payment plan, because otherwise you are legally obligated, if somebody's not paying their taxes, to begin a procedure to take control over that property. And I don't think anybody wants that to happen, but it is in state law that that a lien can be put against the property if, for non-payment of taxes, and then the property can be seized. And that happens pretty regularly in a lot of communities. But I believe in Shutesbury that there really is an effort to work with people who can't pay.
It's also true that this year the select board had passed a change where people can pay their tax bills a month beyond the normal time they'd be due. And there's also, I believe, a period of time, a month after that, where no penalties or interest or that kind of thing. Is that true? That's both true, right, Becky?
Yes, it is. Select Board voted to extend the deadline from May 1st to June 1st. And people who have not yet been able to pay have until the 29th of June to pay their taxes without any added penalty or interest. And I want to be clear that if it goes to the 30th of June, there will be an assessment of those penalties and interest. So if you're still working to make payment, you want to try to do it by the 29th. But the key factor in if you do find yourself having trouble in paying is communication with the tax collector. You need to reach out to her and talk to her so she can try to help you with establishing a payment plan that can work for you. There are other efforts being made through the Housing Authority that will become, that they're still developing, but there are plans for mortgage assistance that we will get information out to the public. And please do call if you're in that situation, and we can help get you the information where there will be monies available to assist people that are having that problem.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, just to reinforce and maybe add to what Becky said, that under state law, the tax collector is required to charge penalties and interest unless there's some special forbearance that's been allowed by the state, which is the case that we're under right now. But once that state permission expires, the law will probably be put back into operation. And this forbearance, it should be pointed out, does not include forgiveness of the tax. It only includes the elimination of penalties and interest during the period that's been prescribed. So yeah, this could be a big issue for some people. And Becky's correct. There might be some initiative from the State House or from the federal government to provide assistance to people that are in this situation. Hopefully that will happen. But the tax collector has limited ability to do something about that under the state law.
So I pointed out at the very top, I believe there's only we're 1% behind tax collections a year ago, for what that's worth. I throw that out there,
Yeah.
but it is not a big problem anyway right now.
Okay, Rita and Eric, were you intending to kind of go through either of the spreadsheets in more detail or highlights or anything? No?
Not like a line by line in the budget. No, we didn't anticipate doing that.
Okay. I know at town meeting, typically any line item that has a big change, up or down, often elicits questions. Do you want to just, either one or both of you just kind of look through and see if there are any lines like that you could address this evening? And in the meantime, maybe I'll just get into some of the more specific questions about the budget lines. So yeah, if you don't mind just taking a look through.
Do you want me to put it up?
I'm sorry, Wheezy?
Do you want me to display it?
Well, why don't I just get into some of the specific questions, related to the budget.
I think that might be easier, just because
Yeah.
the overview
Yeah.
tried to hit the highlights of things that were,
Yeah,
maybe it wasn't successful. That was
changes.
our attempt anyway.
yeah. Becky?
Eric, I just wanted to mention in the overview, when we talked about dramatic increases or decreases, there was one item missed, which was the transportation for the regional school. It did increase 32%. The new contract for the buses for the elementary school went up by over $20,000 this year, a contractual obligation that we have not, no way to avoid. So I just wanted people to be aware that that is one of the big budget drivers.
And that was one of the specific questions we received as well.
Yeah, that wasn't
Eric?
on the sheet, so I did not mention that. I did not.
Great. Okay, how about, let's see, OPEB. State gives the town 30 years to fund OPEB liability, starting at what date? Hopefully that's an easy one for someone.
That's a good question. I don't know the answer.
I
I
don't
think it was
either.
about 2008, 2005.
That sounds about right.
I think
Eh.
2040 is the date that they're, I think it's 2040 that you need to be funded by.
I think that's right. I do remember there was a 40 in the number somewhere. So that sounds very possible to me.
Okay, regional school. Couple of questions about the formula. Why isn't the town using the statutory formula? First of all, and kind of a related question about the regional school is that someone thought that there was supposed to be a decrease of over $800,000 in the regional school budget. And is that correct? AJ?
I can answer just that last one. The way the regional school budget was presented is they presented a level services budget, which is actually a 2.5% increase from the prior year budget. So they did reduce the budget $816,000 from what they described as a level services budget. So that's, I'm assuming, because it's $816,000, I'm assuming that that's what the person was referring to. So that's not, that's $816,000 lower than what a level services budget would be. The budget itself is, I think, like $22,000 lower than what last year's budget was for the regional school district. Is that right, everybody? Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's Shutesbury portion of that.
Right. And there's a significant reduction in our town's assessment. So almost I can look it up actually. Is it about 5%?
$9,000.
Yeah.
With the new, by going back to level funding last year instead of level services.
Right.
Yeah, it had been 54. Who wants to explain the regional assessment formula and why we're not going with straight statutory? I'm happy to take a stab if you want.
I can, or you can, or
Go
anybody.
for it, Eric.
Well, first of all, it's just an incredibly complicated issue, frankly, for not just this town, but all the towns in it, in the region, Amherst, Pelham, Leverett, and Shutesbury. I think the important thing is that we're made up of 4 towns, so we have to somehow get together with those 4 towns and make it all work. Our attempt has been over the years to work with the other towns as opposed to just sort of saying, well, we're going to vote for statutory, and if that means that the school budget gets cut $1 million or whatever it is, too bad. So our attempt has been to try to make it work over time, and our attempt has been at the same time to really enforce the notion that Shutesbury really wants the statutory and believes the statutory method is the best method and fairest method to use. So, for example, we're now, when I say statutory method, I mean the 5-year rolling average of the statutory method, which is itself an alternative method. I told you this was complicated. In any event, we have, over the years, we have moved toward that statutory method, the 5-year rolling average statutory method. This year, we're doing it we've taken another step toward it. I'm not quite sure. We just view it as something that should happen over time because the feeling is the school budget cannot take it if we do it all at once. I mean, it'll be decimating for the school budget. Does that sound good to everybody? Or
AJ, you want to add to that?
Just a quick thing I'll add to that the finance committee and the select board and the school committee, I think it was those 3 committees, right, met earlier in the year to strategize in advance of the 4 towns meeting where where all 4 towns had a chance to kind of advocate for different assessment methods. We went into that process with a goal of reducing Shutesbury's assessment by 3% this year. And for various reasons, we've actually reduced our assessment by 5.6%. So we accomplished that goal and then some for this one, for this step that we're taking this year towards hopefully in the future, even closer to the statutory method.
Bob?
If I may just make a short point, which is that in this four-town meeting where we represented our point of view, where we would like to go quickly to the statutory, there was a looming situation that was described to us that Amherst would refuse to pay any more than 2.5% increase in their assessment, and otherwise the budget would be cut. And so we were sensitive to that issue, and we then compromised to achieve our 3% goal. And now we find post-COVID that Amherst has just unilaterally caused the budget to be cut $800 and some thousand. So it just shows a little bit of the kind of personal interest that goes into some of these towns' decisions. Now, we benefit from that because we had already had a deal where we would get, 40% towards statutory now. So that's where we're at. But
45, yeah.
45.
Yeah, we did represent our point of view, which is the statutory is a more equitable system, and we want to move in that direction in the future.
Weezy?
I'd just like to remind everyone that we have moved from 0 to 10, 15, 25, 35, 45. Has it been that many steps that we've gone? We did 10, 15, 5 steps. So over 5 years, we have gradually moved toward the statutory, and we have gone from 0 to 45% gradually over the last 5 years. So we are moving in the right direction, and they understand we want to keep moving, and we've been doing it nicely.
And Jim, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to ask for Eric to also comment on with these strategy discussions we've had. We're aiming to get to full statutory at some point in the future. What year is that we're sort of targeting right now to get to that?
I'm not sure that we've actually ever come up with an exact year that I think the goal as soon as possible, I guess you'd say, but in these COVID times, it's so hard to know what is going on, frankly. But I don't think that number has not been determined. I don't believe. That's my sense of it. Is anyone?
Yeah, we said 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, I think that. Yeah, that kind of time. Yeah, but not. There's no definite date established.
And just one small point for the participants, we've always recommended moving towards the statutory method with this 5-year rolling average, as I think Eric mentioned earlier, which is in and of itself is an alternative method. And if people are curious about why that is, it's because the strict statutory 1-year statutory method makes planning for the school's budget and for towns very difficult, because there can be pretty dramatic shifts in the assessments for individual towns from 1 year to the next using that method. And so by basing it on this 5-year rolling average of students, it sort of smooths out the impact of that it can have on individual towns from 1 year to the next.
And for example, about unusual impacts, we're facing the COVID impact on Amherst in this coming year. So that might dramatically change the numbers on the board. It won't happen in 1 year, but the thing about statutory is there's always winners and losers, and you just don't know who those are going to be. Even though for a number of years it has been Shutesbury, Pelham came on board, and then Leverett came on board. They're all benefiting more than they used to. Amherst might fall back into that category. 9 years ago, Amherst did benefit from statutory. So there's a volatility in statutory that makes it less than the ideal place to be in the end.
Okay, I think we've dealt with that one pretty well. Just a couple procedural comments here. Some of the quote questions that I'm getting are really comments. And if we're not addressing those, it's because I'm trying to get to the specific questions. So if those of you that submitted more comment type submissions, if you want to resend them, if you have specific questions, that would be very helpful. I don't want to just get into reading a whole bunch of comments at this point, although we will do some of those at the end if we still have time. I also see that someone raised their hand, and I'm not sure what to do with that. It looks like they took their hand down just this moment. So that's good. If you have any questions that you want to ask, just hit the Q&A button on the bottom and submit a written question. And here's one. Regarding the budget lines, what is the rationale for providing the 3% salary increase for town employees?
Want me to, and who wants to take that one?
Eric, you start.
Well, I think the general sense is that the people, first of all, that's less, excuse me, that's less than $18,000. When people hear that number, they go, oh, pay raises and all that. It's $18,000 out of a $6.6 million budget, which is not to say it's nothing, but it's a very small percentage. I believe it's like 0.2% or something like that. But I think the idea to me is that if you don't have that, that increase, you basically are not increasing the pay of the people who are not unionized. All the unionized contracts require raises. So you're basically saying to the people who are not unionized, we're going to raise everybody else's pay. We're not going to raise your pay. And that just doesn't seem fair to me on the face of it. I think just the idea is that it's just our senses of fairness that there are also no rather steps for the people involved, as well as the fact that they're not unionized employees. They don't get any step increases that some other organizations, like the teachers, for example, do get step increases. So it's really the only way that you raise people's pay who work for the town. And I guess that, I don't know, anybody else? I mean,
I think the thing I would add, I mean, since this was raised with the Finance Committee and we discussed it, the way that raises get put forth in Shutesbury is that there is a, I think it's Personnel Committee, is that the right title? There's a Personnel Committee that makes the recommendations, that reviews job descriptions, and they come forth with a recommendation to the Select Board. So this was not a decision on the part of the Finance Committee. The Finance Committee is now.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
It was.
But we went back to the Select Board to ask.
No, we were
What happens is the Personnel Board, Finance Committee, and the Select Board all met together.
Oh, okay. I wasn't at that meeting.
Yeah, and you missed that.
Yeah.
And then the Personnel Board brought some information regarding COLAs and trends in other towns and communities. There's a very active discussion between the three boards. All three boards vote separately and reach a decision.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Yes. I mean, one thing that the taxpayer should understand is that, yes, there was a certain kind of logic to the recommendation of the Finance Committee support the 3% salary increase for town employees. And that logic was fundamentally based on the fact that union employees will be getting substantial raises this year. And I've come to learn after that meeting that the teachers union and teachers employees for our school, which is our, as everybody knows, our largest employer, they have suspended contract negotiations because of the situation, the emergency financial situation in the country. And they are willing to, from what I've heard from informal talks with members of the school committee and of the teachers union, they're willing to sit down with the town and address the town's concerns about these raises. As of the moment, they do not have raises, although in the budget for the school, there's a 5 to 7% increase in salaries for teachers. So yeah, I think that it'd be unfair for everybody to get a raise, a big raise, and then the town employees left behind. But I think the better approach might be for everybody to sit down, all departments, including the school and the town employees, and try to come up with a way to address the financial issues the town's facing and the taxpayers, of course, are facing. So it's not as simple as just, and also, let's face it, there's no inflation this year. So that was one of the other arguments put forward for these raises. So yeah, the school teachers do not get their raises this year. Whether it would be retroactive, that'd be something to be worked out between the union and the town in a future negotiation, whenever that might occur.
Another salary-related question is in regards to police wages. This is not the police chief, but I guess it shows in the spreadsheet a 4.24% increase in police wages. I assume that's not a 4.25% salary increase, but something other than that, Becky?
There was an adjustment made mid-year to some of but that wouldn't have impacted. There was an adjustment made to raise what they get individually, but that did not change their rate. What is in their budget is a 3% increase. And I think what is also in there was a small change requested by the police chief in the overall wages. A very small one.
So
I'll have to go back to get you a better answer. I'm sorry.
okay, yeah.
But that happened in January, but in his budget hearing, the amount that he requested is there. And I think it's what we did is he used to have 7 line items, including all the elements of the union budget in there. And so we took the 7 line items and condensed them into one because the other line items accounted for their cell phone stipend and their vacation, their holiday pay, and a few other items. And when we combine the line items together, that's why it's showing as more than a 3% in that single line item, because in the prior year, it was broken out over a lot more line items. So the total changed in that particular line item. Does that make sense to you? There was a condensing of union, union fees and things that were part of their salary had been broken out into additional line items. This year, they asked to put them all back into a single line item. So that made for a different starting base.
Okay, so the line is line 83, which says police wages. So you're saying that that is now a compilation of what was several different line items, what were several line items previously?
Yep.
And those include other than strict wages or not?
They are the benefits that are within the contract, like they receive holiday pay when they work a holiday, and they receive the full-time officers receive all the officers receive a stipend for their cell phones, and then there's a $600 payment for those who have qualified for fingerprinting. So there's a number of smaller issues that add into the total wages that was broken out last year. So it shows a different percent change. And I know Bob wants to speak to this.
I just want to say that, yeah, I'm familiar with this. I was part of the team that negotiated with the chief, the union, I should say. This is a total increase in compensation over whether you divide it into 10 parts or compress it into one part. That was all compensation that we decided, or the chief decided to want to call wages, that total compensation has increased 4.25%. That's an increase in 1 year, 4.25% from last year. So that's, to be clear, it's an accurate depiction of the total compensation. If you get cell phone compensation and increased holiday compensation and so forth, that is another form of pay.
But were not those lines in last year's budget? Am I wrong
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
see, Bob, I don't agree because those lines were in the budget last year.
And now they
So
aren't.
they were in the budget separately. And then we brought them all into one line item.
Right, so now they're combined, and the combined amount has gone up 4.25%.
I don't think so.
Not if you looked at the total, if we looked at what the total police budget was last year and this year, we would have seen those amounts included in the total wages.
Okay.
But it was they were in separate lines and not in the single line.
One thing it does seem to me is we might want to rename that line so it doesn't say police wages and benefits or something. So it's
Okay.
so it's clear, you know what I'm saying? So it's clearer that what you're saying is true.
Okay.
Becky, wouldn't we have added those into last year's? So when you prepare this year's budget and you collapse those line items, wouldn't you have taken those line items and added it into the last year's wage line items? So we were able to compare apples to apples?
I don't believe I did.
Okay, thank you.
So that would be a better way to do it.
Just one last thing I'll say, that if you look at the total police budget from this year, from last year, it has gone up 3.41%. So just for the record, that's what's happening. That's a 3.41% increase for the total budget.
And that, you know, given everything going on this year, that could be an issue or a question at town meeting. So I think, Becky, it probably would behoove you to, you know, be well prepared with the whatever statistics you have to offer at that point. Okay. Let's see. I'm sorry, I've been kind of absorbed in that conversation, haven't been following the questions.
You're doing a great job, Paul, by the way, I think.
I'm sorry?
You're doing a great job.
Oh, thanks. Well, here's the last one that just came in. Shutesbury's population has remained stable. Why is an assistant town collector needed? Why an assistant town clerk needed?
I think I can take that. You know, the assistant town clerk, well, first of all, we're going to be going through a transition this year with the town clerk. So we'll have a new town clerk, and the cost for the town clerk is actually dropping pretty dramatically if you look at the budget. And the assistant is a temporary, is kind of a short term in order to deal with the fact that we have a presidential election coming up. Everybody remembers that in November. And if this upcoming town election is any indication, the amount of work in doing not only a presidential election, but also we might very well be voting by mail again. And it's a tremendous amount. It's much more time-consuming, expensive, difficult than just having a traditional election. So that assistant, again, is short-term and to take us through this next election cycle.
And the treasurer?
The treasurer, do you want to take that, Becky?
Yes. The treasurer 2 years ago, our longstanding treasurer, Gabe Volker, who had been with us over 17 years, took a job in Orange, and we were lucky enough to find a candidate who had a lot of banking experience, but he had not been a town treasurer before. He was very active in town government. He had all the fundamentals down on finance, municipal finance. And the decision was made by the select board that keeping our treasurer who was leaving us on a part-time basis would be the best way to, to have fiduciary responsibility in the transition. The treasurer is the most sensitive financial post. Well, they're all the accountant and the collector are very important too. But the treasurer, with all the borrowing and the handling of multiple bank accounts, it's not a simple job. None of the financial jobs are. Gabe was willing to stay on last year and then into this year because of our potential for going into bonding for the new fiber network. And so she has been a phone call away whenever our new treasurer has hit any snags in the road or question marks. It's been our auditor was very pleased with the arrangement and gave our new treasurer extremely high marks because of the amount of support he got during transition. He has become very accomplished. The third assistant that we have on the books is the assistant tax collector, town collector. Unfortunately, we had hoped to hire that person this year, and because of COVID, we weren't able to hold interviews and find a person to fill that slot. But our current collector is about to hit her 45th year as the Shutesbury town collector, which is a remarkable thing. She is one of the best in the business. She regularly hits 99% collection rates, and we need someone training to replace her. And bringing someone in as an assistant was determined by the personnel board first, and then the select board in approving job descriptions, and finally in the approval of the budgets, a decision that was approved by multiple parties.
Okay, thank you.
Let's hear it for Ellen, 45 years. That's
No
pretty
kidding.
remarkable.
Oh, Ellen.
Yay, Ellen.
Thank you, Ellen.
So there were a couple of questions about the inner workings of the finance committee, I guess, this year, regarding, proposals to do things differently instead of using so much free cash to reduce some of the non-service related line items. And sounds, at least the questioner believes, that the decision was made to, and they use the term deplete cash reserves, but I know that's not accurate. But to use more cash reserves than maybe some people felt were necessary when cuts could have been made in other places. So does anyone want to talk about, those kinds of discussions that you had and why you came to where you did?
Well, I can take that, at least I'm sure everyone else might want to hop in too, but I think as Rita said at the beginning, the majority of the committee has felt that basically the budget we have come up with is effectively a bare bones budget. It's not a budget that's fat in it. And it's necessary, that it's reducing that budget will reduce services, I believe. And I think other people would agree with me, not everybody, but I think there's a general agreement that that's the case. What was the question? I'm sorry, I'm fading here. What was the question again?
It's about using,
why
are we using reserves?
Oh, yeah. So I think our thought about using reserves, again, had to do with was our sensitivity toward the idea of having lower tax bills for people. So I think there was a thought that that was one way to do it. I would point out that, I mean, Bob has suggested, for example, that we maybe could have funded some of the future-looking items, if you'll call that, from free cash. I mean, to me, that's sort of a left pocket, right pocket decision. You can decide to take them out of the budget and to fund them with free cash, and we're keeping them in the budget, funding them with free cash. In either event, we're funding them with free cash. So, I mean, I think that I think the goal in general was to fund them with free cash to try to reduce taxes. That was the general sense, and to keep up, to keep the level of services the same. Which I would point out that again and again in the town, at town meetings over history. I mean, the town has voted and supported this kind of budget. This budget you're looking at right now is not significantly different than last year's budget or the one before that or the one before that. There are differences, there certainly are, but people have voted resoundingly to support this level of service. And I think that our sense was, the majority sense was that that was something we should continue.
Jim H.
Yes, we've been talking about free cash. Would anyone, would you, Eric, or we should try to explain to everyone what is the, apart from giving ourselves a tax break on our real estate taxes, taking $220,000 out of free cash to give us all a tax break is, and we were just talking about FL and McKay just a short time ago. This is something that many consider to be a very dangerous precedent to take. For example, what are we going to do next year? Are we going to take another $220,000 to keep the, to keep our tax rate lower, or is it going to rise to the level that it probably should have been before we considered this? I think this is pretty serious, a pretty serious problem. And it certainly accounts for why we have taken such a huge chunk out of free cash. This is money that we had hoped or were planning on using to fix the school roof, Locks Pond Road culvert, and a number of other projects. But instead, we're taking it and sort of giving ourselves a tax break. And fiscally, a lot of people think that isn't particularly responsible.
Well, to answer your question, I would say that first of all, we're taking, I would say, a prudent amount of money out of free cash. Which one of the uses of free cash is to sort of fund emergency situations. I think our sense was this: if there's anything that qualified as an emergency situation, it was this year of COVID stuff. I personally don't disagree at all with the general notion that we don't want to be funding budgets with free cash. That's a bad precedent. Everyone I think is very aware of that. It does build in the potential for a structural deficit in the budget and so forth. It's not clear at this point, for example, a lot of the free cash we're spending this year is to make up for loss of state revenue. And it's not clear what that state revenue is going to do. Even this year, it's not totally clear. It's certainly not clear what it's going to do next year. And I think I said at the beginning, or I should have said if I didn't, but I mean, I don't disagree with you. I mean, I don't think that we're looking at a problem here that's a 1-year problem. I think this is going to be going on for a while. We got to figure out what we're going to be doing here. Maybe eventually we will have to cut the budget. Maybe eventually we'll have to have people out there shoveling the roads by themselves with shovels because we can't afford a road crew. I don't know. It's possible, but I don't think we can answer that question right now. All we know is right now we can give people the level of services they want and have asked for over the years by using free cash, and that our hope is that still will leave us a good pile of free cash for the future as well. That's our thought.
How about Jim Walton? You haven't spoken too much.
Yeah, I just want to sort of reiterate the last point, Eric, that you made, and that is the overall free cash level today is at a healthy level. We are at a healthy level. We've built it up wisely, I think, over the past number of years. And one of the primary reasons for that was the expectation that sooner or later something troublesome would come down where we would need it. And we have needed some of that this year. And we have taken several $100,000 out of free cash, but still the level that we have at the free cash level right now is at a healthy level. I agree, Jim, if we were doing this every year and this became a habit, that would be a problem. But we need to focus at the overall level and make sure the overall level of free cash is at a responsible, healthy level. And I believe that's where it is today.
Well, it's one thing to shore up the budget, which I think we all agree is probably going to be necessary, but it's quite another to take an additional 220,000 out to, to give everybody a $1 a break on their real estate taxes. And, that I think is what troubles me, because we're sort of setting ourselves up for the problems that's going to create next year, when the expectation is going to be there. When we are faced with the same situation next year, the economy may be in a lot worse shape than it is right now, at least according to all of the, the heavyweight sources out there who tell us about unemployment and all the rest of it. And so we may be in an even worse condition. But it's one thing to use it to shore up the budget, but quite another to cut the tax itself, because that's an enormous amount of money. And that's what troubles me.
I just want to say that, I think I hear what Eric and what Jim is saying, and I think that the problem I have with this use of free cash, which is $500,000, by the way, if you look at the revenue, is that we're not taking it from any other source. We're not reducing any of our outlays. We're just taking it all from free cash. And to put it in simple terms, your free cash is your savings account for the taxpayer, as I've heard it described. And if you're having financial trouble in your home, in your household, and you decide to just drain your go into your savings account and don't change your spending habits, that's not a very even-handed way to approach a financial problem. You do both. You try to use your reserves cautiously and carefully and maintain them in the future, or for some other projects, a new roof on your house or whatever, but you also maybe modify the way you're spending money. And I propose that we do a little bit of that with this year's budget to create some relief for the taxpayer, not just by using a savings account, but by reducing outlays on things which maybe have long-term value, but don't necessarily have to be funded this year. And there's a whole group of those things. And we have done a little bit of that with the account 30, and we've done a little bit of that with the SREC. But again, those are actual accumulations of taxpayers' money too. So I think that it's not unreasonable to ask all town operations to level fund at the very minimum their budgets, and also to put off or eliminate certain things like the SREV and some other things that I've listed, to instead of just relying completely on free cash to close the gap.
Okay, at least one attendee appreciates seeing and hearing the Finance Committee have a good, honest, vigorous debate among themselves. So that's good news. I would like to make...
It's 8:40.
Yes?
Are we gonna set sort of an end time, or?
Sure. Right now, I'm down to 5 open questions, and most of them are just comments. So I haven't seen any come in the last few minutes. So I guess this would maybe be a last call. If people do have final questions they would like to get in, this would be the time. I do have one myself, actually. I know in the past when we've had the luxury of actually having handouts at town meeting, one of them has been kind of a status report on the various cash reserves that we have and some of the fund balances as well. I think I'd asked for this several years ago at a town meeting. Becky, would you be able to put that up on the town website at least, along with the other budget-related documents before the town meeting?
Yes, the majority, many of the, so the fund balances you are speaking of are, like, we have the CPA here. You're talking about
Not every, some years we actually have warrant articles that deal with funds, putting money into funds, taking money out of funds, or whatever. And I think it's helpful to, for people to be able to see where those funds stand. But my main request here is for cash reserves. I don't think in either of the documents that was posted we have any balances of cash reserves, right?
Yeah,
No, we do. Here, I'll put them up.
Posted?
Yeah,
It's right here. Hold on.
it's on the website. The
Okay.
reserve analysis.
I'm sorry, I guess I didn't see those.
Yep.
They're on the select board page of the
Well,
website?
this has it right here. Let me show you.
Well, that has it too, but the fund.
It's a separate page.
Fund
It's
analysis.
separate pages.
Yeah, the reserve fund analysis page.
Right
Yeah.
here, we have it right
It's
here.
a spreadsheet like
We also have this.
asked for a few years ago.
So this, what we're looking at right now, is currently on the website?
There's much more detail. There's
Yeah,
a, there's a,
there, but there's also a separate sheet that deals strictly with the beginning balance of all our major funds and the impact to each one with the decision-making potential of town meeting. So you can see that we start with $1,389,000 in free cash, and the total projection is we'd end up with $1,083,863 if everything that we are talking about is funded, and if the state aid is reduced by 30%, and because the fund balances could change if we have a special town meeting to make any further
Right.
adjustments. But
Okay,
they're all there.
Here, I'll put it right here.
I guess I wasn't the only one that did not find it on the town
So I
website.
can, so this is
Yeah,
the
there it is.
document.
Yeah.
And it is right here under, so this is the select board page, and it's right here under Finance Committee Presentation Documents.
Okay,
And
very good.
this one is the Reserve Funds FY21.
Okay, thank you very much. I just missed that.
Yeah.
Okay, there were a couple people who are thanking us for, a very informative evening. One specific question we can slip in here at the end: why is the $112,000 fire truck and dump truck paid off loans still in the budget as something else?
Could I take a stab at that?
Sure.
Okay, the 112,000 is a key component of our capital plan that was developed. Well, the capital plan was developed about 7 or 8 years ago, but about 4 or 5 years ago, we worked with Joe Markarian to write up the Finance Committee bylaws, not bylaws, a manual that, and the policy book. And in that process, there was a lot of discussion about what we have done routinely for over 10 years, which is to try to maintain a % of the budget to make available for borrowing. And then when an item is paid off, that as was the case prior to the purchase of the fire station, there were 2 or 3 years where this amount—
Fire truck, not fire
fire
station.
truck, not fire station. The $112,000 was transferred into capital stabilization, which helped build our capital stabilization account. And the benefit of building that account led to the fact we were able to, town meeting supported $274,000 of capital stabilization to help support the drops in broadband, which I believe reduce the overall cost of installation for all the subscribers. We since have gotten, potentially we're going to get grant money back on that. But the important thing is to create debt capacity, identify it. It's a key element in our capital plan, which will be put up on the website as well. So you can look at the capital plan that goes out about 30 years. We identify key elements, equipment and vehicles and infrastructure that are things that we know will have to be paid for in the future, and it helps our planning. In the next 10 years, there's over $2 million worth of capital needs that have been already identified. And this is our small piece in the budget of preserving the capacity to maintain our capital plan. It has a long-term policy behind it, and it's been working well for the last 10 years.
Bob?
I'm a dissenter on this one, as usual, I guess. But yeah, this money, we borrowed money to acquire a dump truck and a fire truck when we had a substantial capital stabilization fund. We went out and borrowed it, and we heard arguments which kind of make my head spin, that we should borrow, we should contribute to capital funds so that we can have purchases of major equipment without having to raise taxes. And then when the request comes along for the equipment, we will go out and borrow money and add money, add that borrowed money to our budget. And then when those vehicles are paid off, we get arguments that we should keep that money in our budget. This is during the year, as Eric's described, not like any other year. This is a year with the COVID virus. This is an emergency, a bad financial situation, and we're keeping this money in the budget. I mean, that's completely nonsense as far as I'm concerned. It should come out of the budget instead of taking the free cash savings that the taxpayers have accumulated. That money and some other money should come out of the budget. And then if somebody wants to add more money to stabilization, then there should be a request for the taxpayers to approve such a request. Otherwise, if they need major equipment, we either dip into our reserves or we ask the town people to vote it in. So it's just not a good way to do business, and it's not particularly this year. It's not a good idea.
It is the way the DOR recommends that it be done. I would point that out. Becky?
Bob, you did say that we didn't add the money. What did you say? We borrowed for the fire truck and we didn't add the money.
I said we had money in reserves and we borrowed it anyway. Even though we had money in the reserves for capital expenses, we borrowed the money. We didn't tap those reserves. We borrowed the money for the fire truck and the dump truck. We explained to us, and when I hear someone trying to explain to me that it's better that I borrow money and pay interest than use my savings, I usually walk out of that car dealer's office. You know, I mean, that's what savings are for, is for major expenses. And this, now with the expenses have been paid off, we're going to actually compound this mistake by continuing to fund this line. I think particularly this year, it's just not supportable. We should be removing that from the budget. If we remove that and some of these other choice items, we could reduce the demands on the taxpayer without reducing services and without tapping into the free cash reserves as we're doing presently, or not as much, I should say.
So I know we have to wind. I know we have to wind down here. Do you want to take a few more questions, or would you like to wrap it up? I'm going to leave it up to you folks. It's been a long night.
Let's take some more questions.
Okay, well, there's a couple that, you know, I'll do my best to try to ask here. One was asked a bit earlier about Proposition 2.5. The question reads, was the intent of Proposition 2.5 to guarantee an increase of 2.5% each year?
Yes.
Pardon me, absolutely no. It is to put a ceiling on the taxes of 2.5% per year. It was not brought to us by the Department of Revenue. It was not brought to us by Joe Markarian, who works for that organization. It was brought by a referendum that became law in the state to control growth of taxes to 2.5% a year and a maximum of $25 per thousand. And that's what we're living under today. There is absolutely no obligation for us to raise taxes at all. We do so by choice.
I would point out we're not raising taxes this year we're raising them by 0.18%. Just to clarify, we're not raising taxes very much.
We're not raising taxes at all.
We're
That
reducing
was
it.
to the question.
Yeah.
I was answering the question, which was about 2.5. So,
Becky?
But as far as DOR goes, it's a requirement that in all budget projections that are put together, that the 2.5 is included in your calculations. It's, you know, how you use it and what budget you vote is another story. But as far as building the budgets and creating and defining your levy, it is a requirement. It's not optional. And I do hope we will be putting the Joe Markarian policy manual up on the website that was approved by the select board back 4 years ago when Michael's on the board. And so people can read through it, and it'll be available for you to develop your own understanding of the basic principles of municipal finance.
Yeah,
Okay, good. That was another question. Jim?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Becky, you've referenced Joe Markarian a couple of times. Maybe for the greater group here, maybe explain a little bit who Joe is, just so for their information.
Okay.
Yeah.
About 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, through one of the governor had an initiative of community compact grants, and one of them it was to develop financial best practices and also a capital plan design. And we got a grant to work with Joe, and over about a year, maybe less, 7 or 8 months, he met with the finance committee, those members who took extra time to be there, and the select board, and worked. And with me, we went through a number of revisions of our the budget format. That's where we developed the more developed revenue side, so that the finance committee could track the excess levy capacity and really monitor where we were in relationship to the 25 per thousand. And he is since retired, but he was very helpful in answering questions and working with the finance committee throughout that period.
And he at the time was retired. He worked for FERCog,
For
right?
FERCog.
And he was retired from the Department of Revenue. So just his qualifications were that he knew, and he's also been in town government himself in Swampscott. So he knows a lot about the whole municipal finance picture.
He retired from FERCog in, I believe, March of this year.
Right.
Okay, a couple other questions regarding reserve funds. Can someone explain why we have, how or why we have almost $400,000 in the CPA fund? Rita?
Rita, yes.
So I'll speak not as a member of the I'm speaking as a member of the Finance Committee, but I also sit on the Community Preservation Committee. So the CPA fund is created by a surcharge on the property taxes, and it was a vote taken back, I don't know, Paul, you might remember, maybe 10 years ago, to create the Community Preservation, or to adopt the Community Preservation Act in...
More than that.
Okay.
Okay.
And
Likewise,
the CPA has funded a number of projects. The 3 basic uses for CPA funds are community housing, open space and recreation, and a historic preservation. So things like some of the work that's gone on at the school with the playground, the Hearst House on Leverett Road, the West Street Schoolhouse have been approved. We, on the community housing side, provided some funding to Habitat for Humanity for the property, the first-time home buyer house that they're building on West Pelham Road. But those funds have to be spent for those 3 uses, and an application is made to the Community Preservation Committee for any one of those 3 categories. And we're always looking for good proposals, and then the votes go, the CPC makes a recommendation, and it goes to town meeting. The only application that we received this year was from the regional schools for some schematic design and engineering costs for the playing field at the high school, and it's not clear whether or not that's going to be withdrawn because of other priorities for the schools at this point.
it's also worth mentioning the Finance Committee has nothing to do with the CPA
right.
money at all.
Right. It's not even, and doesn't even come before the Finance Committee.
Right.
Okay. Boy, it's hard to pull out easy questions from these last ones. Here's one that might be a little difficult, and I don't know if it'll be answerable or not, but it's regarding the fair assessment of property values in town. And I'm picking this one because it's from someone who has not submitted a question previously. But the gist of it is, why aren't we asking people who can pay more of the very important town functions to pay more of those functions? So it sounds like it's a question of why can't we have basically a graduated property tax?
The state law.
Yeah, I'm not a
No,
lawyer,
it's-
but I believe that the graduated income tax and graduated any kind of tax is against the Constitution in Massachusetts. So you could do all those things. It would require a constitutional amendment, and I'd be in favor of it personally, but it would be a constitutional amendment to make that happen.
Really, ultimately, you know, what's happened over time is that the state used to have a much higher state income tax, which is more progressive than the property tax. And what's happened is they've reduced it. It's gone down and down and down. So that means less money coming to the towns, and then the greater burden being put on the property tax. So where we once had a system where there was a lot more state aid as a result of people with higher incomes paying more money, we then the legislature chose to reduce the income tax, which then negatively affects residents, and negatively affects communities, and so we have a regressive system in the property tax.
I mean, almost every year at town meeting, I have a rant about how, the federal government has cut taxes, the state government has cut taxes, and we, the town, are the tax body of last resort. And I've been saying it for decades, and it's still true. In fact, the state income tax went down to 5%. As Rita suggested, this year it's gone down again. I think it stops this year, but I think it was just this year, it just wound up down to the 5% rate. But it has been going down as recently, I believe, as this year, maybe last year, I can't remember. And we all know the federal tax has been decreased on the wealthiest people in the country. So you do the math, or get a third grader at the elementary school to do the math for you.
Okay, so we, just for your information, I think we had a high of about 35 attendees in addition to the 9 panelists earlier in the evening. That's dropped down to about 23 attendees. So people are starting to drop out, and maybe it is time to wind down a little bit. Rita, maybe before we leave the CPA discussion though, and I know even though it's not strictly a budget item, it is in the warrant, and it does involve taxes in the town. So there are a couple of questions about, having that big a balance. Does that mean that, we're just not getting, enough good projects being proposed? And does that mean that maybe having the CPA is not really justified?
That's a good question, and I think discussion could happen. There are, you can use CPA for open space acquisition. It's something that I'm not sure that we've ever had a proposal for open space acquisition. We could also use CPA to, there's been a lot of interest about senior housing and potentially doing something with senior housing, perhaps on lot 032. So in some senses, having those reserves and having some money built up is a good thing. But I, as a member of the Community Preservation Committee, would like to see us, have more proposals, and we have the ability to bond. So if we were to have a really big project, a big request, the CPC, the town can bond and then pay those funds over time. So open space and recreation, historic preservation, and community housing. Love to hear from people.
Becky?
It can also be used to repair the dam. if we ever need funding for a major dam repair. So that's a good thing.
It was not that, I remember that discussion when we were adopting CPA many years ago.
Be nice if we could use it to repair the culvert under Lockspond Road.
Right. Or put
As
a new roof on the
recreation,
school.
I'm not sure how that falls into any of the categories, Jim.
Well, we'll find a way somehow.
Right.
That's a good idea.
Maybe that's like a tube, that water tube for people.
There we go.
So it's 9:04. I think maybe I'll just ask one more question, which is, looks like it's pretty much the end of the strict questions. A lot of the others are more comments or, comments. So the last question, in the climate of defunding police nationwide and frugal attitudes in general, why should we spend money on breathalyzers and radar guns, et cetera?
I can respond to part of this just because Bob and I were participated in a capital planning meeting where these two projects were discussed. So, you know, I think for me, I don't really see my role as a finance committee member to be making decisions about sort of policing in our town and police priorities. I mean, I just didn't seem like that's the function of the finance committee. I can tell you that the radar unit was requested because the department historically had one, and which is no longer functioning and certified. And the chief presented it as kind of a basic traffic control resource. And I think they have to use what's called moving radar now without that unit. And I think from a safety perspective, it's safer for the police to monitor traffic using, using radar because they can be parked in their car and sitting in the car. So that was the logic behind that. I think it's clear that there is a bigger conversation to have, and I think that's already started from judging from some messages and emails I've seen. And so I think the person who's raised the question, yes, I think we should. I mean, I think there is a bigger conversation to have about kind of the function of the police department in our town and what's the right amount of resources that should be dedicated to that. But I think that conversation is sort of just starting now, fair to say. And I think the last thing I'll say is the request for the breathalyzer unit was presented by the chief as kind of a basic tool that they use in the process of obtaining probable cause when there is a concern about potential DUI offense. So that was the logic. There was not, Bob can remind me, I don't think that these were not unanimously approved. I mean, there was
They sure weren't.
Disagreement about it. Yeah.
Right.
They sure weren't.
Right. If I may say a word just about the breathalyzer, which I think is actually quite, in my mind at least, connected to the overall issue that everyone's discussing in the country about what is reasonable policing. And I would make no disparaging remarks about our police. They're all very nice people. But the idea that you're looking for probable cause by using an instrument that is evidence of which is not admissible in court is a little bit of an overreach, I think. That's why I was against that particular device, a handheld breathalyzer that if the suspect were to fail would not be admissible, the evidence from which would not be admissible in court. It sounds like one of these stop and frisk type of things. If the person doesn't have obviously some kind of problem functioning, then you shouldn't come up with some device that'll give you a predicate for searching his car and finding some violation or something. Anyway, as far as the other thing goes, the radar gun, I felt, and I talked to Dan Fernandez when he came before the board that AJ and I both serve on, that this measly request should be funded from their budget. This is not the proper use of capital funds. I know Becky will tell you otherwise, that it's technically okay, but my notion is that these are small requests that should be funded, if at all, through the budget, if they're important. So that was the exchange that we had, just to slightly, kind of replay it at that committee meeting.
And just as a reminder, all of us as voting citizens have the final say in all of these matters at town meetings. So do show up. I just want to thank everybody for the great questions. I think there were quite a few of them. It looks like we had a total of about 70 different questions or comments submitted tonight. So thank you to all. Thank you for those that really hung in there till the bitter end. We still had 24 attendees at the moment. Thank you to all the panelists as well, and look forward to seeing everyone at town meeting. Rita or Eric or Becky, do you have any final
Just
comments you'd like to make?
Just to
Thank you,
take a
Paul.
vote to adjourn.
Thank you, Paul.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second,
All those in favor, Farrell, aye.
Groves, aye.
Hemingway, aye.
Cool eye.
Cashew, aye.
Stalker, aye.
Walton, aye.
So no more meetings till town meeting, just clarifying.
No more meetings.
For the
till
minutes.
Wednesday.
Mercifully.
Good night, everybody.
All around.
Thanks, Paul.
Good night.
Thank you for
Thank you.
everybody who
Thank you, Paul.
came.
Thank you for attending.
Thanks,
Have a good
everybody.
evening, everybody.
Paul. Good night.
Good night.